Hey everybody, I wanted to share my version of the December daily project with you that I made for 2017. I'm calling this December's to Remember because it's not a traditional December daily project where you tell the story of every day in your family for the whole month. Rather, this is a collection of 31 stories of Christmases that I experienced when I was a little girl. So I'm just going to flip through here and talk a little bit about some of the products and pages and stories, but I will have close-up photos and that kind of thing shared on my blog if you would prefer to see them there. I did not put the stories in any particular order. In fact, I thought it was more interesting to kind of jump around in terms of time. So my first story is from when I was about 5 years old because I had this great picture of myself posing in front of this white artificial tree that we had at my family's real estate business. And I actually pulled out the journaling so that you can see at various points in the album I actually use hidden journaling like that because it allows me to tell a much longer story without kind of getting in the way of the design aesthetic of a particular layout. This second story is from maybe the very next year, I think, and it's about how the boy that I had a crush on, it never worked out because my mother insisted that I give him socks for Christmas. I mean, who wants socks, right? Some of the stories are small little tidbit stories that I remember just because they were part of my childhood that were important to me. And then others are stories that are really more the kind that I know because my family told them so often. For example, the third story was about the time I got terribly sick at my grandmother's after eating lots of spaghetti. I remember bits and pieces of that story, but not a lot of the details. However, my family told the story constantly. So it was one of those cases where I can remember the way they told it to me and then I could relay it here. Here's another example where I hid part of my journaling because I didn't want the words to take up too much room on the spread, but I did want to be able to tell the entire story. You'll also notice that I don't actually often type my journaling when I scrapbook, but for most of the stories in this album, I did choose to type my journaling. That was important to me because I wanted to make sure I had enough room to tell the stories in as much of their entirety as I possibly could, but also because I wanted people in maybe future generations to have an easier time reading the stories. Of course, it's my hope that people in the future will still know how to read cursive, but I know that that is not as popular in school and that kind of thing anymore. And so I felt like in order to get the full stories told and in order to make sure that other people would be able to read these stories in future generations, that it would be really smart to go ahead and, use my laptop and to type them. I have to say that was kind of a hurdle for me to overcome because that is not something that I necessarily enjoy in terms of scrapbooking. That is not something that I feel like it's fun or particularly creative. But I do think that it was an appropriate choice for this particular album. I also included lots of different stories. This story here was a difficult one about the end of my mother's second marriage. And while I know that some people don't think that telling the difficult or sad stories is something that they want to document, something that they want to remember, it was important to me because it did happen at Christmas and because it did shape the coming years of my life. You'll also notice that I use a combination of full sheet page protectors that are 6x8, as well as some divided page protectors. Here's one that has 4 of the 3x4 pockets. And you can see in this example that I actually did do some handwriting for my journaling. I journaled on a card front and back that I then slipped behind that photo of my great-grandparents' Christmas tree. This is an example of one of those small stories that I don't want to forget, but that I didn't necessarily need a lot of time and space in order to be able to tell the story adequately. You can also see with this spread that I have some items that are not in page protectors. That craft colored folder there that I'm using as kind of a divider piece is not in a page protector, and I'm glad, because I wouldn't have been able to put those jingle bells on that particular side and have that kind of tactile nature of the spread if I had had to put those items inside of a page protector. So that makes me really happy that I was able to do that. Many people asked me as I worked on this project how in the world I was able to find such great pictures of the different things that I wanted to share, the different stories I wanted to tell. And my quick answer is the magic of the internet. I had a handful of photos. I mean, I think when I look through this album, maybe half of the photos, maybe a little bit more than that, are photos that I actually had in my collection from my childhood. And the other half of the photos are ones that I searched for online and printed myself. These 2 pages right here are a perfect example of that. I did not have a photo of the UK's basketball team from that time period. I didn't have a photo of the Barbie camper that was such an important gift to me that particular year. And so being able to find those images online meant that I wasn't limited in telling those stories to only using the photos that I had in my possession. This one here of the bridge in Henderson, Kentucky is another example of a photo that I grabbed online. And then you can also see that I'm using a divided page protector with some handwriting on a small tag in order to tell the story here. So, I think the flexibility of this project was really helped, and like my enjoyment of the project was really helped by the fact that I gave myself permission to both journal by hand when it was appropriate and in typing it. And I think it was really helped by the fact that I used pictures that I had from my childhood as well as ones that I captured from the internet. There are even some photos that I took currently. This photo of Dear Baby, that was my special baby doll from when I was very tiny, is one that I actually took in my living room as I was working on this project because I still have the doll. And so I think that that's an important thing to remember if you want to work with heritage photos or you want to tell stories from a long time ago, that sometimes you can intersperse current photographs and make them work. And sometimes you can adjust photographs that you have from those time periods and they serve your purpose as well as you need them to. This particular story was about the tradition that I had with my grandparents of going sledding in front of my house at the farm, and that photo was not from the winter, but I made it work. So I think that's a good example. Some of the pages are smaller and are not in divided page protectors or page protectors of any kind. Here's an example of that. This is just a thinner cardstock page that I made, and on one side I have a downloaded picture from the internet of an old-fashioned sled that reminded me of mine for the story before it, and then on this other side I have a sack that I have used as a way to hold the journaling for this particular story. And then I still have room for embellishments. I still have room for a small picture. I think it worked out really well. On this particular spread, the photo on the bottom left is vintage. It's from when I was a little girl of about 2 or 3, but the photo on the right was one that I took again of that baby doll in my living room as I was working on this album in December of 2017. And so I think that's a great kind of contrast in terms of when the photos were taken, but that they worked together to tell that story in a really full way. I had a great time using lots of different kinds of product and pattern. I think that, that's part of the fun of a project like this, is that you can gather all of your Christmas embellishments, or all of your particular arranged theme embellishments, and you can use them to tell your story in a fun and attractive way. I used a lot of materials from Marie-Pierre Capistrain's line at Pretty Little Studio, and then I used some other things from Pretty Little Studio too, particularly a lot of the die cuts that you see are from there. I also used some Felicity Jane Christmas papers from this year. I used some crepe paper items from last year. I think it was their Snow and Cocoa line. And then I used several items from Carta Bella's current Christmas line because it had that real vintage feel to it. As you can see here, I'm a fan of using a sack or some sort of way to tuck my journaling into a spot and then to be able to pull it out and read it. And that's largely because I do have a tendency to be a little bit wordy, no surprise there, but I don't necessarily want the focus of the spread when you look at it to be the words themselves. The story is important. It's integral in being able to understand why these photos matter, but that doesn't mean that I want page after page after page to feature the words themselves. Hopefully that makes sense. I had a great time kind of incorporating different patterns and some unexpected color involvement and some different kinds of embellishments that I've been collecting over the years. And for me, that made this particular project feel really creative and exciting. I also loved that I wasn't really held to scrapbooking every day, because that's not conducive to my life during the holidays, or let's be honest, really my life anytime. And so that was really nice. And I loved that this has become a treasure trove of stories that I might not otherwise have ever made the time and room in my life to tell. These are so important in understanding who I am and where I come from. And this finished album means more to me, quite possibly, than any other project that I've ever made in scrapbooking. And saying that after scrapbooking for 17 years now is a huge deal. Here it is. It's my finished December's to Remember album. It's not perfect, but it is pretty magical in its own way, and I feel so grateful and proud that I made the time to create it. I hope you'll think about making something like this to tell the stories of your own lives.